In this 3-part Blender tutorial series, I'll show you how to create this stylized low poly forest river scene. So there's going to be a cabin on the edge of the river with a dock and a boat. We're also going to be animating the scene. We're going to be adding these cool glowing orbs floating in the scene, and we'll also be adding this cool stylized blue fog effect. So in this part, in part 1, we're going to be modeling the low poly grass, the river rocks, the rocks, and then we'll also be creating these hand painted stylized trees. Then in part 2, we're going to be creating the cabin, the lantern in front of the cabin, and the dock and the boat, and then we'll also do the materials and we'll set up some lighting and set an HDRI background. Then in part 3, we're going to be setting up all of the environments, so we'll be setting up the ground, and then we'll also be using geometry nodes to distribute the rocks and the grass and the trees on the ground. And then we'll be doing the animation, kind of animate the cameras moving around, and then we'll do the rendering and the compositing and the video editing to get the finished animation. So the entire tutorial series will be completely free here on my YouTube channel. And if you enjoyed the tutorial series and you'd like to help support me and this channel, a great way to do that is by purchasing the finished tutorial project files, and you can get that with the links in the description. And another great way to help support the channel each month is by joining my Patreon page. So thank you everyone who's currently supporting me on Patreon. You guys really help me to keep on creating these free video tutorials. So if you join one of my Patreon memberships, as well as helping to support the channel each month, you'll get access to lots of Blender content like 3D models and assets, tutorial files, artwork project files, procedural materials, geometry node modifier setups, and lots more Blender content on my Patreon page. Now I am going to be using my drawing tablet for texture painting the texture of the low poly trees, and also I'm going to be sculpting the ground in the environment. So if you have a drawing tablet, then I would recommend using that for some of those parts, but you don't have to use a drawing tablet. If you don't have a drawing tablet, then you can just use your mouse. Now I am going to be using a few different free resources online to make this tutorial, so all the links will be in the description if you'd like to download them. So here on Polyhaven, I'm going to be downloading this Industrial Sunset 02 Pure Sky, and because we're going to be seeing this in the background in our final animation, I'm going to be downloading the 8K version, so it is higher quality. And I'll just download the HDR version, and then you can just download this. And then the rest of these resources that I'll be downloading are optional, but if you want to add in the same sound effects that I'm going to be using in the video editing, I'm going to be downloading this bird sound effect. This is a free Creative Commons Zero sound effect from freesound.org. I'm also going to be downloading this river flow sound effect from freesound.org, and again, this is Creative Commons Zero. And I'll also be downloading this winter forest wind sound. Again, we'll be putting this in the background of the video editing, and this is licensed as Creative Commons Zero. And if you want to use the same royalty-free music that I'll be using in the final animation, then I'll be using this cool atmospheric music from Film Music. So again, link is in the description. So here I am in a new scene in Blender, and I'll have my screencast keys right down here in the corner. So I'm going to start by just deleting everything, and we're going to create the low poly grass. So I'll go to the add menu, we're just going to add a plane, and I'm just going to scale the plane down by a 0.1, and then I'll hit Control A, and we're just going to apply the scale. Let's just zoom into the plane by hitting the period on the numpad, and I'm going to go into edit mode, and then I'm going to rotate this on the x-axis by 90 degrees. And then I'm going to scale it down. Let's also bring it up on the z-axis so that the origin point is in the very bottom. We'll kind of scale that down. We can just deselect everything, and we're just going to box select the top. Now let's move it down, and then we can extrude it up, and we're just going to make a blade of grass. You can kind of scale this down, extrude it, and then scale it down again. And before we get too far into the project, let's save this. So we'll click on File and Save As. And I'll just save this as Forest River in a folder with all my project files and just save the file, and then just hit Control S as you're working on it to save it. So now I'm going to be modeling 3 different clumps of grass. So I'm going to select everything, and I'll duplicate it, and I'll rotate it on the z-axis, and I can give it a random rotation. I can also make some shorter and some longer. So I'm just going to model 3 different clumps of low poly grass. So I'm going to duplicate this entire piece. Let's box select this, maybe make like a longer one, maybe more of like a straight one, like that. And you can deselect everything and then hit the L key with your mouse hovered over that grass piece to select the entire thing. And you can duplicate it. Let's rotate it around on the z-axis. Maybe have one which is kind of rotated down. Maybe also scale this one up a bit. And then you can hit B for the box select, click with your middle mouse wheel and drag over to deselect some of the vertices, and just kind of bring this down so we kind of have like a thicker one. And then you can select everything and you can go to top view and you can duplicate it and rotate it and just kind of make some clumps of grass. And also make sure that the grass is kind of in the center here, and make sure the origin point is at the very bottom of the grass, because where the origin point is, that's where it's going to be distributed out on the plane using our geometry node setup. So let's move this over, and I can hit Shift D to duplicate. We're duplicating this in object mode, so we have another one, and we can go into edit mode, and then we're going to change this one. So I'll hit the L key with my mouse hovered over some of these pieces, and we can just delete the pieces, and then we can box select these, kind of move them up, maybe rotate some of them over. Again, you can hit the L key with your mouse hovered over the blades of grass to select some of them, and then I'll select the first one and duplicate it and move it over here. And we're just going to make one more clump of grass, so just select some of these and we're just going to delete them. So I'm going to have one which is kind of thicker than this one which has less, and then this final one is going to be a bit smaller, and it's only going to have just a few little blades of grass. So again, just making them kind of random so that each blade of grass looks a bit more unique and different. And also when we set it up with geometry nodes, we'll add random scales and random rotations just to make them look a bit more random. So that's going to be the clumps of grass, pretty simple. So if you just click and drag to select all of them in object mode, we'll hit Control A, and we just want to apply the scale and also apply the rotation. So we're going to select all of these, we'll hit M, and we're going to click on New Collection, and we're going to type in grass. This way, if we click on Create, now here in the outliner we have a grass collection. So when we add these with geometry nodes, we can add the objects randomly with the grass collection. Let's now set up some basic materials. So I'll go over here to the shading workspace, and I'll zoom into the grass, and I'll go into the material preview. So we'll select the grass. Let's click on new to add a new material. I can just call it grass. And then if we select all the other objects, we'll click on the drop down here and choose the grass. So just add the same material to all the objects. So now what I want to do is make it so that when we duplicate the grass, each group of grass is going to randomly be a slightly different color to add some more variation. So to do this, we're going to search for the object info node, and we can put the random into the base color. This way, each object is going to randomly have a color generated between white and black. So if I select these objects and duplicate them, you can see every time I duplicate it, some of them are lighter colored and some of them are darker colored. So I'll just delete these objects. But now what I can do is I can add a color ramp in between these to make my own custom colors. So I'll search for a color ramp, drop this here, and now I can just change all the colors. So for this one here, this tab, I'm going to make it kind of like a dark gray. And then if I click on this tab here, I'll maybe bring it out a little bit. And this tab is going to be kind of like a yellowish greenish. So kind of like that. So we have a dark green. Let's actually make this a little bit darker. And then we have kind of a lighter green. I'm also going to hold down the control key and click here to add some other tabs. And then this one here will make this a little bit more saturated. And this one here will also make it a bit darker and really saturated. And then this one here, we might just make this one even a little bit darker. So just something like that. So we have just a few different variations. So then you can see each one of these blades of grass will be a slightly different color to just make it more random. And also on the roughness, I'll turn this up to like a 0.7 because I don't really want it too shiny. Let's go back here to the layout. And now this grass collection, I'm just going to click on this check mark here to disable it, to get it out of the way. Let's now create some low poly rocks. So to do this, I'll go to the add menu, and we're just going to add a UV sphere, and I'll scale this down, and I'll type in 0.1 and then hit Control A and apply the scale. Let's go into edit mode. I'll hit the O key to turn on proportional editing, and now I can just select some vertices, and I'll hit G to grab. I need to scroll my mouse wheel to change the size of the proportional editing, and I'm just going to kind of drag these around, and we're just going to make like 5 different kind of randomly shaped rocks. Now the bottoms here, I want that to be a little bit more flat, so if I just click and drag to box select the bottom, I can scale it on the Z-axis and kind of scale it down a bit flat like that, and then just kind of randomly shape the rocks. Now we're going to make these look low poly, but I'll be doing that later. So in object mode, we're going to duplicate the rock, bring it over here, go into edit mode, and you can just select some of the vertices and just kind of move them around. Go back to object mode, you can duplicate the rock, go into edit mode, and maybe you can have like a thin rock, so we'll scale this rock down, just kind of move this around here. And then we'll select this again, duplicate it, go into edit mode, and we can kind of rotate it. Maybe we'll make like a tall rock, a rock which is a bit more bumpy and tall. And we're just gonna make a few different rocks. Let's also make one more, which is a bit smaller. All right, just like that. So we have 5 different rocks. So I'm gonna now select all these. I'll hit Control A, and we want to apply the rotation and scale. So now to make these look low poly, they already do look a little bit low poly, but I want them to look more triangulated and random. So we're gonna add a modifier for this. So we'll go here to modifiers, we'll click on add modifier, and we're going to add the decimate modifier. Now if you drag the ratio down, you can see we kind of are getting this kind of low poly effect, or this kind of low poly style, and things look more triangulated, and that looks really cool. So I'm going to make it pretty low poly, and then if I box select all the rocks and then shift and select this one last, I can hit Control L, and I'm going to copy modifiers so they all have the same modifiers. Then to apply the modifier on all of them at once, we're going to click on Object, we're going to go to Convert, and we're going to convert to Mesh. So if I go into Edit mode, you can see that's now just geometry. So I'll hit the M key, we're going to click on New Collection, I can just call this Rocks, and click on Create. And then let's also add a material to these rocks. So we'll click on the rock, we'll go to the shading workspace. And what I'm first going to do is actually click on the drop down here in the shader editor, and we're going to choose the grass. But then I'm going to click on this little icon here, which looks like two little pieces of paper. That's going to duplicate it. So it is now a separate material, and I can just rename it to rocks. So now what I can do is I can just change this color ramp to make it more gray colors. So I'm going to select the color ramp, and I'm going to hit the backspace to reset it. And then also if I select each rock, we're going to add the rock material to each one of these rocks. So just click on the rock and click on the drop down and add the rock. So now on the black tab, I'm going to make this more of like a dark gray. And then on the white tab, I'm going to make this much darker because it's definitely a little bit too bright. And this one here, let's make it a little bit darker, something like that. And this one here, definitely make it darker. So now you can see we just have some different rocks, and some of them are darker and some of them are lighter. Let's actually make this even a little bit more dark. So you can see this one is lighter, this one is darker, and if I duplicate the rocks, you can see they're going to be randomly different colors. So let's go back here to the layout, we'll save this project again, and if I just close the rocks in the outliner, let's just click on the check mark just to hide it. So now we're going to be creating the river rocks, and the river rocks are going to be pretty similar, but I want to make them a bit more flat. So if I just click on the rocks here on the rock collection, let's just right click, and I'm going to click on duplicate collection. So now we have a duplicate of that collection, and if I double click on this to rename it, I'll call this river rocks. So now to create the river rocks, I'll just go to the add menu, and I'm going to add a plane, and we're going to scale the plane up. We can also bring it up on the z-axis just like that. And now what we're going to do is we're going to add a boolean to kind of cut the rocks. So let's click on one of the rocks, we'll click on add modifier, and we're going to search for a boolean. Now here on the boolean object here, we'll click on the eyedropper, and we're just going to add the plane. So now if you go down here, you can see it's cutting the rock. So now if we select all of the other rocks, just shift select all the objects, and then lastly shift select this object last, so it's the active object. We're going to hit Control L, and we can copy modifiers. So now you can see they're all being cut by the boolean. And then with all of them still selected, we'll click on Object, Convert, and we're just going to convert it to Mesh, and that will apply all the modifiers at once. So I can select the plane, and we can just delete it. So now I'm going to select each rock and go into Edit mode, and I'm going to scale the rock down just to make it a bit more flat. And if I hit 1 on the numpad to go to front view, I want to bring this down so that the origin point is right there on the flat spot. So I'll go back to object mode, we'll go into edit mode of this rock, and we'll kind of flatten it and bring it down here. And we're just going to do the same thing for all the rocks, and just flatten them a little bit because I want them to be a bit smaller and a bit more smooth. So those will be the river rocks, they'll just be popping out of the river a little bit. So I can now hide the river rocks here in the outliner. It will save the project again. So now let's start by modeling the trees, and we're going to model the tree trunks first. So I'll go to the add menu, and we are going to add a cylinder. And then if I open up the add cylinder settings right behind me to make this look low poly, I'll turn the vertices to 8. And it's way too big right now, so we'll scale it down by a 0.1, and then I'll press Ctrl A, and we're going to apply the scale. Let's go to front view, and I'll go into edit mode, and I'm going to bring it up like this. We can also turn off proportional editing because we don't need that. And I'll go into wireframe, and I'll deselect everything. We're just going to box select the top, and I can bring it down, and then I can scale it down, and we can extrude it, and then scale it down, and extrude it again, and scale it down, just like that. So this is going to be the tree trunk. Maybe select this entire thing and kind of scale this up a little bit like that. And then if you select everything, you can kind of bring it down just like that. And again, we want the origin point to be here on the bottom. So now if we select everything, we can extrude it way up. Let's zoom out here. And I want to extrude it up pretty high, maybe about that far. And then we can scale that way down, maybe even a little bit farther. So we have a pretty long tree trunk. So now back in object mode, we're going to be adding a new object. So we'll go to the add menu and we're going to add a circle. So let's go into edit mode and we will extrude everything, but then we'll scale everything and I'll type 0 and enter. Then we're going to hit M to merge and we're going to merge by distance. And that will just merge them all together. So there's just going to be one on the very top. So what we're going to do is we're going to be texture painting kind of a stylized texture for the branches. And then we're going to bring this up. So we're going to bring this up later. And that way the branches will look like they're going back down. And so it'll be kind of a cool way to create some stylized trees. So let's just select this object here for now and we'll just hide it. So hit the H key to hide that object. So we'll select this object and we're going to go over here to the shading workspace. So we need to create a new texture that we're going to paint on. So let's click on new to add a new material. I'm going to call this tree branches. And let's now go to the add menu and we're going to search for an image texture. We'll drop this down here. We'll click on new to create a new image texture. And I can just call this tree branches alpha. We're calling this tree branches alpha because this is going to be a mask to tell it where the tree branches are going to be. And then the other spot is going to be transparent. Now in the width and height, I'm going to change both of these to 4096 by 4096. That is the standard resolution for a 4K texture. And I'll leave the colors fully black because where it's going to be black, that'll be transparent. And then we're going to paint white and that's where the branches are going to be. So we'll click on new image. And just for now, we'll put the color into the base color so we can kind of see it. So now we need to UV unwrap this. So if we go to top view, we'll go into edit mode and we're going to select everything. And we'll hit U, and then we're going to use the project from view bounds. And make sure you're on top view when you do that. Now if we click over here to go to the UV editing workspace, you can see it's UV unwrapped it nice and flat. Now if we hit the A key to select all the UV editing, we're just going to scale it down a tiny bit so that it's not overlapping and it's not touching the outside of the texture space. So just like that. So now we can start to paint this. So we're going to click right here to go to the texture painting workspace. And I'm just going to hide the 3D view. So we'll drag this over here because we're just going to be texture painting on this and we're going to texture paint flat. So here on the color, I'm going to go here to the RGB and I'm going to turn all of these up to 1 so that it is going to be fully white. So if we paint, it'll be fully white. And then also let's use the paint hard brush. And also here on the radius, I'll just drag the radius way down so it's a lot smaller. So I'm going to be using my drawing tablet for this, but you could also just use your mouse if you want to. Now I'm also going to have some Amazon affiliate links to some drawing tablets that I recommend. So if you're interested in purchasing a drawing tablet, you could check out those affiliate links in the description. And if you purchase a tablet through those links, then I will earn a small commission, but it won't cost you anything extra. And the drawing tablet that I'll be using is just this simple small Wacom pad tablet. It's a pretty small tablet, but it works really great for doing texture painting. So again, what we're doing is we're going to paint a mask of where the branches are going to show up. So I'm just going to start to go along here and I'm just going to kind of paint where the branches are going to be. So we're just going to basically paint kind of a cool texture here, a detailed texture of the end of the branches. And then later we're going to fill this. So don't worry about it being black most of the spots. We're going to fill this in later once we are finished creating the basic mask. So basically these endpoints here, this is going to be kind of the end of the tree branches. So we'll just go along here, kind of making a cool stylized texture. So I'm just going to continue to do this all the way around the entire texture. So just something like that is going to be just fine. Maybe add a few more details here and there, just some little branches kind of popping out. So now we're going to use the fill tool. So we'll click right down here to go to the fill tool. And then if we click here on advanced, we want to drag the fill threshold way up to around a 0.9 or a 0.95. I'll do a 0.95. And now we can just click here and that's going to fill it in white. And that was a bit too much, so I'll hit Control Z to undo that. So what I'm going to do is go here to the paint hard brush and you can see right here there was an issue where it's kind of filling this in. So let's just fill that. Just make sure there aren't any areas where it's not overlapping because we don't want any spot to be touching the outside of it. And I also missed this part right here, so just kind of fill that in so that it's not connecting. So now let's click back here to go to the fill brush, and on the advanced here, make sure this is like past 0.9, and we'll click there to fill that. And there you go, now you can see it's nicely filled, and you want the fill to be pretty high because if I turn this advanced down, if I turn the fill threshold down and then click here, you can see there's going to be this ugly kind of line there. So I don't want that. So make sure it's really high. You can actually see right here, there's like kind of this gray line here. So I'm going to undo that and I'm going to turn this really high. So turn the fill threshold almost all the way up, but just turn it pretty high. So just turn it almost to 1 and then just click there and that's going to fill that all in. All right, just like that. Let's just zoom in here. All right, so I need to like fill this in here, click there to fill that in. Just go along here and fill in all these little spots. And then there's a few spots here that we need to fix manually. So if we just go back to the hard brush, we can just kind of manually fill that in. So let's just look along here. This is a bit weird, so I might just kind of fill that in. That's really it. It's pretty simple. So once you're finished, you can just click on image, and we're going to click on save as. And we're just going to save this in our project files, and we'll just click on save as image, and make sure you save that, because if you close Blender without saving it, it's not going to save your texture painting. So we can click back here to go to the shading workspace. So now what I want to do is I want to mix this between the principled shader and a transparent shader. So we'll go to the add menu, and we're going to search for transparent. And then what we're going to do is search for a mix shader. So we're going to use this one to mix two shaders together. So we'll just drop the mix shader right here. So the transparent is going to go into the top one, and then the principled shader is going to go into the bottom one. And now this tree branches alpha, this one is going to go into the factor, and we can unplug it from the base color. And we'll just drag this up here. So now you can see that it's going to be transparent wherever it's black, but then where it's white, that's where it's going to be. So you're going to be able to see it where it's white. And also, just to show you real quick, if I drag this up like this, you can see it's kind of stretching it, and we're getting that cool stylized effect of the tree branches. So I'm just going to undo that, but that's what we're going to use to create the stylized trees. So I'm now going to go to the add menu, and we're going to search for another image texture. We'll drop this down here, and we'll click on new to add a new texture. And this one I can call this tree branches color, and we'll set it to 4096 by 4096. And on the color here, I'm going to set this to kind of like a dark green, so something like that. And we'll click on new image. Now the color can go into the base color, and now it looks nice and green. Now we already UV unwrapped the object, so we can now just go back here to texture painting, and we can now just texture paint what we want the texture to look like. So I'm not going to texture paint on the object, I'm just going to texture paint here on the flat surface. So what I'm first going to do is go here to the color, and I'm going to make this like a green color, but it's going to be a bit darker. So what I'm first going to do is click here on the color, and I'm going to make this a nice bright green, so something like that, not too saturated, kind of a bright green. And then what I'll do is go here to the soft brush, so paint soft. Let me just make my radius a bit bigger, and then I also want to turn the brush strength down. So now what I can do is just go along here, and I actually need to change the color because I changed the brush, so it changed the color. So let me just hit Control Z to undo that. Click here, and we're going to make it kind of like a bright green color. So now I can just go along here. Let me just turn the brush strength down a bit more. And I'm just going to go along here and start by painting kind of a line. So now if you look here on the 3D model, you can see there's going to be this white line there. Then I'm going to go back and forth, and we're going to paint another one right there. So kind of like an X. And then we're going to go back and forth here. So paint another one there and another one here. Just like that. All right, kind of go back and forth, kind of make it look kind of random and noisy. Paint that in there and there, have it go to the very end. And then here in between, we're going to just paint a little bit more. So maybe turn the radius down so it's a little bit smaller. And in between here, we're going to paint just a little bit more, kind of painting in those little lighter areas. So now that we painted that, I want to make the center a little bit darker and have a few darker areas. So if we click on the color, let's make it very saturated of a green, and then we'll turn it down. So I can now just go along here in between these, and I can just paint a little bit of a darkness kind of in here, just to make the inner parts a little bit darker to kind of get the texture of the stylized branches. All right, just like that. And then I'm going to make my brush a lot bigger. And right here in the very center, I'm just going to make it a little bit darker. So just going along here and making the center part just a little bit darker, going along there. And then as it gets closer and closer to the center, it's going to be darker and darker, something like that. So the last thing that I want to do is kind of paint some little white lines or lighter colored lines. And that's going to look like the pine needles. So we'll go to the color, we'll make it fully white, and we'll make it kind of a lighter color. And let's turn the strength up, not all the way, but a bit higher, and we'll turn the radius way down. So now I can just go along here, maybe turn the strength down a bit more, that's a bit too high. Even a little bit farther down, I guess the strength shouldn't be that high. We're just gonna go along here and paint this texture, which is gonna look like the pine needles. So I'm just going along here, just little tiny strokes, and I'm gonna do this all the way around, kind of in a circle, going into the center. So I'm not going to show the entire process because this is very time consuming, definitely takes quite a while. I'm just going to go along here, try to be patient and just draw in all the textures there for the needles, but this is definitely going to add a lot of detail. All right, and that's going to be it for my tree texture. So we'll click on image and save as. And we'll call this tree branches color, and we'll just save it with our other project files like that. Let's go back over here to the shading workspace, and I can zoom out here. You can see what we've created now. So now let's shade this object smooth, just shade it smooth. And if we go into edit mode, we're going to bring this up just like that, kind of bring it up. And now you can see we kind of get that stylized kind of branches. So then we're going to duplicate this and scale it up. And you can see we're going to create some cool stylized trees. Let's select this object, and on the roughness here, I'm going to turn this up to like a 0.7, so it's a bit more rough. Actually, I might turn it up to a 0.8, so it's a little bit more rough. I think that's a bit better. Let's go back here to the layout, and I'll hit Alt-H to unhide the objects. And if we select the tree trunk, we'll click on New to add a new material, and I can just call this tree trunk. For this one, I'm going to turn the roughness up to like a 0.8, so it's rough. And then the base color, I'm going to make this just an orangey color and then make it darker so it's a brown color. And let's go into the material preview so we can see how that's looking. All right, so let's go to front view, and I'm going to select the tree branch, and I'll just bring this up here, kind of scale it down a little bit like that. And then I can duplicate it. We can scale it down on the Z-axis and kind of scale the whole thing down. And then we can give it a random rotation by rotating it on the Z-axis. And then I'll duplicate it, give it a random rotation, kind of scale it on the Z-axis. And we're just going to continue to do that all the way around and just have it kind of come up until we have a nice looking tree. And I think maybe this tree branch might be a little bit too high. So if I go into edit mode, we're just going to box select the top and maybe bring it down a little bit, and maybe scale this one up a little bit, and maybe these kind of scale them out a little bit so they're a little bit bigger. And so we're just going to be doing this a few different times and making a few different random trees. Now there is one thing about the materials I don't quite like, and that is that I just think the trees are a little bit bright. So if I just go here to the shading workspace, what I'm going to do is just go to the add menu and add a hue saturation value, and I'll put this between the tree branches color and the principal shader, and then I can just turn this value down. I'll just turn down a little bit more so the tree is just a little bit dark, maybe turn it to like a 0.6, because I think the tree should just be a little bit darker. Let's go back here to the layout and save the project. So now I'm going to duplicate all the objects and I'll move them over, and we're going to make a few different variations. So I'm just going to select these other objects and delete them, and we can now just make another tree which is going to have some different variations. So this one is going to be maybe a smaller one, so we'll have it kind of scale down, rotate it, and just make it end a lot sooner. And then if you go into edit mode on the tree trunk, you can just box select the top and bring it down, so we're going to have a much smaller tree. Like that, maybe duplicate this again, kind of scale that up. We can have like a really pointy top, all right, like that. We'll select all these and we'll duplicate them again, and we're just going to do that and create 5 different variations of our tree. So this one could maybe be a bit of a wider one. So if you kind of select these, go into edit mode, you can scale them down and then just scale them up, scale them down the Z-axis, so it's a bit more of a wider tree. And then maybe make another small one on the top for a point. You could also make the tree a bit thicker by duplicating it and then rotating it so there's even more tree branches. Duplicate this one again. We don't need that one here, we'll just duplicate that one. And let's make this one maybe a bit lower down. We can box select these and kind of bring them down like that. And we can scale it down, bring it up just like that. All right, and then for the last tree, I think I'll make like a really tall skinny one. So I'll just box select this tree and duplicate it. We can just box select the branches, go into edit mode, and I can scale all of them up on the Z-axis, scale them down like that so we have kind of a taller one. Maybe scale those branches down and rotate them. All right, so we have 5 different variations of our trees. So now if we just click and drag to box select them, and then I'll lastly select the trunk, I'll hit Control J so they're all one object. We'll do the same for this one. So select all the branches, select the trunk last, hit Control J. I'm just going to continue to do that for all the others so they're all joined together into their own objects. Just like that. So now we have just 5 different tree objects. Let's select all of them and we'll hit M to move. We're going to click on New Collection. We'll call this Trees and click on Create. We'll open the outliner and we can just hide the Trees collection. So I'll just save the project again, and this will wrap it up for part 1 of this stylized low poly forest river scene animation. So I hope you're enjoying the tutorial series, and thank you so much for watching. And I'll be uploading 1 part each day of the tutorial series, so when the next part is released, I'll have the link in the video description, and it'll also be right up there on the end screen. You can also purchase the finished tutorial project files with the links in the description, and that's a great way to help support this channel. So thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in part 2.